How are you doing? I'm Gilad, and I lead the data science and analytics teams at BuzzFeed, and I'm so excited to be here today. Thank you for having me, and thanks for staying till the end of the day. So I really want to talk to you about how we at BuzzFeed use data to our advantage and talk about some of the ways in which we've introduced machine learning and artificial intelligence into our tooling and product. And so we've, as a company, as a digital media company, we've invested over the years in building tools and techniques that we believe give our teams superpowers. We collect every piece of information that we can about every interaction that happens across our content on our platforms and across distributed platforms. And we use that historical data to train systems that introduce smarter decisions and different ways of optimizations, which I'll talk about in a little bit. So we really truly believe that in a way, this investing in data and building these tooling give our team superpowers. But at the same time, we recognize that these tooling and some of these approaches, especially when applied towards ranking content and news, can have unintended consequences. For example, what you see here is a network graph that represents a very polarized information space. In this case, it is Instagram. And what you see is every person is connected to folks who are similar to them in the network. So your position in the graph dictates the kind of news that you will see because of the way these ecosystems are created, because of the way these ranking systems are produced. They sort of push users to areas of the graph that align with their points of views. You start to get content that aligns with your own point of view. So we have to be careful with the technologies that we create. Even though we see a lot of engagement, we are also seeing increased polarization in some of these network spaces. And then also, it's increasingly, with all these ways in which we rank content online, it's increasingly hard to agree on what is true. For example, when you search for Brexit online, you may get a wide range of answers. Is Brexit good? Is Brexit bad? What are the consequences of the United Kingdom exiting the EU? Right? It's really hard to gauge what is trustworthy, what is not. Similarly, when you search for Hillary Clinton's health, you see all this conspiracy theory across YouTube, across Facebook, that are seeded by groups trying to seed doubt in voters. So this still is a remnant from the previous US elections. It's really hard to gauge and understand what is true. And at the same time, we've effectively normalized surveillance, right? It's okay for companies to collect data. It's actually the norm for companies to just collect data without thinking of the consequences. And as we've learned from companies like Cambridge Analytica, it is increasingly important for us to have more transparency in this process, to understand who has access to our data and what are they doing with it. And so it's a really complicated space, and it's hard. And our slides went away. But I can easily say, you know, especially as a data scientist working in this space, I can say, there's so many problems, too many problems for me to solve. I may as well wait for someone else to work on them or solve them. But I think it's all of our duty. Anyone who works in this area, in this space, it is our duty to do the best that we can to tackle some of these problems. So I want to talk to you today. I want to tell you a little bit about how BuzzFeed uses data and data science. And then I also want to talk to you about some of the ways in which we've tackled some of the issues which I introduced previously. Okay. So, who knows BuzzFeed here? Who consumes BuzzFeed content? Yeah, a whole bunch of you. So we have a set of websites, we have a set of apps. We're consumed by young audiences all over the world. And we've built a variety of formats and ways in which we reach audiences. We make incredibly popular quizzes. We have content around food. We make content around travel, such as this one, how to spend 24 hours in Bangkok, which is a popular video that was on Facebook. And we have a news show that runs on Twitter in the United States. So we're very active both on our own platforms, but also on distributed platforms, such as Snap, Instagram, Facebook, YouTube. We have some of the largest channels there. We have a team of incredible journalists. We have a team specifically focused on investigative reporting. Some of these stories take many months, if not years, to uncover. We've built Tasty from the ground up. It started as a content experiment and grew to this global food network where there's an app, there's a set of websites, and there's content all over the web around sort of introducing ways to cook. A more recent experiment is called the Good Advice Cupcake. So BuzzFeed constantly tries to experiment with content. And the Good Advice Cupcake was recently introduced to Instagram. It's one of the fastest growing accounts on Instagram. And it is effectively an advice column. So it's a way for teenagers to ask advice. They break up with their girlfriend or boyfriend. They're feeling moody today, and the cupcake gives them advice. It's cute, and it's generated a ton of engagement. Here's another recent experiment that has become very, very successful. Kelsey, one of our popular video producers and talent, is taking on the Sims 100 Baby Challenge on YouTube, and she's playing The Sims and trying to make 100 babies while playing The Sims. And it's a very sort of engaging series. She's constantly responding to the audience. She's asking her fans how to name the babies, and it's hilarious. You have to watch it if you haven't seen it. So I talked to you about some of the formats and content that we create, and our network it's a global network, and as I mentioned earlier, we operate both our owned and operated, so we have a set of websites and apps that we build and operate, but we're also very active across other platforms like Facebook, like YouTube, like Snap, and we have some of the largest channels there. And what we think really of this process of publishing is always an opportunity to learn. So every time we publish a piece of content to either to our site or to a distributed location, we consider that as a learning opportunity. What can we learn about the format? How has it reached the audience? What has it moved? What has it gotten our audience to? What action are they taking based on this piece of content? And of course, this process of publishing, learning, and iterating on our assumption is completely fueled by data. Data is the way for us to really understand our audiences, whether they're on-site or off-site. And so we use machine learning specifically to do a bunch of things. We use machine learning to optimize our site and our app experiences. We use machine learning to predict which content will go viral, and our curators use that information to then help their curation strategy. We categorize content, right? We use machine learning to understand better tags and better labels for our content. And then we're experimenting with content creation, and I'll show you an example there. So this is one very common scenario which many publications do. If you're a digital media publication, you must be A/B testing, right? And what does A/B testing mean? It means you have a hypothesis and you want to test to see if it's valid or not, if that hypothesis is true. And a way to do it is to try out a few versions and split your audience and see sort of which of the versions has statistical significance, right? Which of the version is by more than chance is actually sort of a winning variant depending on the metric that you care about. So in this case, we are testing two variants of the same article when we publish them to a feed. One article, variant A, has a long text on top. One article, variant B, has a short text, right? And we send both of those to different audiences and we measure the performance. In this case, we measure the number of clicks that users take. So, who thinks that version A will perform better? Raise your hand. Version A, more clicks? Yes, no? No, version B. Version B, the short one, you guys are correct. And so if you work on digital and media, you know that you have to get to the point and sort of being succinct is actually helpful, especially when dealing with feeds. So in this case, we ran a test, we saw the results, we've learned something, and we'll update our assumptions, and now when we publish, we'll try to have succinct text in feeds. And so we do these things, these kinds of tests we run continuously, and they're built into our CMS, into our publishing platform. So our editors and our content creators don't even have to think about setting up tests. They run automatically. Now we have a variety of algorithmic ranking systems across our site. We have systems that recommend content, personalized content in feeds. We have systems that they rank the top strip, which has images. We have personalization. So many ways in which content is personalized and ranked and recommended on site. And we've seen some huge advantages to doing that and really boost in core metrics. Here's one example of leveraging our historical recipe data to tune a model that then starts generating its own recipes. So in this case, this AI, we trained it with tasty recipes, and we asked it to create a new recipe. So it came up on its own with this idea of pineapple pizza nachos, which you can, if you know tasty, you can imagine that being an actual recipe, right? But as you start to look at the text that this AI created, you start to realize that there are pretty big gaps. It's kind of strange. You bake for 15 to 20 minutes until rice is at least 10 minutes. So like the text in itself doesn't actually make sense, even though the title and the structure may seem like a real recipe. So this technology is very, very powerful. This generative AI technology is powerful, but it's not ready to be used yet. Here's an example of a very useful approach and a use case that BuzzFeed found very valuable in leveraging machine learning and AI around curation. So one of the common problems that we used to have is given a piece of content, which page should it go on? Specifically in this case, which Facebook page? We have hundreds of Facebook pages, and some of the largest pages on Facebook have many millions of users. Some of them almost 100 million users, right? And so historically, this was a very manual, laborious set of decisions where a curator would take a piece of content and decide, okay, which page should I place it on? So in this case, we have 3 items. Look at this adorable dog who looks like a bear, chili dog bread rings, and 16 cows that are too friggin' cute for words. These are 3 real articles from BuzzFeed, and the question is, which pages should they go on, right? And so the first approach as a data scientist, you may say, okay, let's look at the words in the title, and let's build a classifier that can take as input the words from the title, and then make a prediction on which page it should go into. So these kinds of classifiers are trained on historical data, and because we've stored and invested in our data over time, we have all these historical curation decisions stored, so we can train a model to learn from them and then make inferences to items that the model has never seen before. So in this case, you would say, okay, look at this adorable dog who looks like a bear. It would identify the words adorable, dog, bear as more associated with the BuzzFeed animals page. It would also look at cows and cute, right? And then also in the last one, it would say, oh, dog is a word that typically goes into this page, so let's publish this item to this page. So very naive set of assumptions, and the solution, obviously historically it's a naive base is the approach, and it's a very helpful way to build a classifier, but as you can see, you may get various false positives. So items that do not belong in this class would be suggested. Now, when we move to leverage some of the advances in neural networks and artificial intelligence, we could use something called a bidirectional long short-term memory network. And that's a handful as a set of words, but what it actually means is it uses a neural network that starts to learn and understand the relationships between words. So instead of taking a naive approach and saying, okay, which words appeared in the title and how many times did they appear? What it starts to understand is the relationship between where a word appears and adjacencies to other words. So in this case, chili, dog, bread, ring, because the word dog appears next to chili and bread, it would not get a high score in terms of relevancy to the animal's account, right? And so leveraging some of the advances in artificial intelligence gives us a boost in the performance and accuracy of these models, which all in all make automation more possible, right? And so we're using these techniques and similar techniques to add efficiency, add automation, and make better recommendations in the process of publishing. And we we use them in different use cases around relevancy, around identifying evergreen content. So this is content that we may want to republish. We identify content that is likely to be performant, so viral content, and then we add human signals into the mix, and we create this sort of scheduling and routing service, right? So this tool is a tool that we built in-house that has had huge impact to the way we publish content across our distributed platforms. So I told you a little bit about the way we use data to our advantage, and we really do believe it gives our superpowers, but we recognize that we need to do this in a responsible manner, and in a manner that builds our users' trust, right? If we don't have our users' trust, we should not be using this data, right? And so I told you about ways in which we collect data, we make inferences from data, we always ask for user consent, right? And we deploy algorithmic ranking in many places on the site. And I want to highlight a few ways in which we have internal processes in place when we think about data collection. We use scenario building to assess sort of what is the worst case scenario around our inferences. We have a variety of reporting and analyses that we publish, and we think about model interpretability a lot. And so one specific example which I want to dive into is around data collection. And what I want to talk about is location data, which is something that's available to any publisher, any service, or any application that requests this information from users. Now, what's concerning to me is that many services and many apps, many companies are collecting this type of data in order to sell it without their users really knowing and understanding that this data that they're providing is being collected or even being sold. Now, again, this is done without user knowledge, typically. And the claim is that the data is anonymized, right? It is latitude, longitude, but it doesn't have someone's name. So companies are making the case that, oh, location data doesn't have your personal information, so it's okay to sell it. But what I want to show you is how easy it is to take a supposedly anonymized location data from someone and turn it into very personal data very quickly. And so what you see here is the way location data typically looks. I know it's a little small and fuzzy, but what you have are latitude, longitude, which are numbers, right? And you typically have some prediction for activity, like is this user moving? Have they stopped? Are they running? Maybe they're in a car. And all applications have by default access to this kind of data from your phone, right? So even if they're running in the background of your phone, they're still collecting your location. So what we did is run an experiment with a few data sets that were donated to us. And we took this data, so we took location data and someone's historical location data, which is effectively latitude, longitude, and timestamp. Now, you start by cleaning, exploring the data. You sort of convert the latitude and longitude points to squares on a map, which is something that's very easy to do. It's called geohash. Then what you do, you add a very simple probabilistic model to try to infer, okay, given the user and the square, where are they at, right? Which venue are they at? It's very easy to join that with existing APIs that Google or other services provide to try to get a venue. So you can say, okay, a user is in this bank, a user is at this school, a user is in this building that has these offices, right? And very quickly, you jump from anonymized data to very personal data. You get to someone's Facebook page, you see their car and license plate from Google Maps. So it's very easy to go from this list of numbers, this latitude, longitude, to sort of all this very personal information about a user. And so through the process of doing this exercise, trying to understand what we can extract from this supposedly anonymized data, we recognize that the act of surveillance is not just about data collection, but it's also the act of interpreting it. Yes, we collected this location data, and before we went through the process of making inferences and analyses, it was actually anonymized, but the act of analyzing it turned it into sort of this de-anonymized data set. In many cases, anomalies have outsized impact. When somebody visited their family member, or they went to a conference, or they went to a place outside the norm of work and home, then they were more easily identified. And then joining multiple sources that are, even if they are separately anonymized, when you join them, they can de-anonymize data, right? So these points are really important, because I feel like when we talk about data and privacy, we tend to focus on collection, where these mechanisms have a lot of impact. So as a company, we decided not to link behavioral and user data, and we don't know where someone is specifically. We can't link that to any account, right? We detach behavioral consumption data from any PII. And we have this review process in place when we propose new data collection, right? So going through this exercise really taught us a lot about how we want to operate as a company that's taking ethical practices around user data collection. Now, throughout our development process, we do these scenario building exercises where we ask ourselves constantly, what is the worst thing that someone could do with this data? If we were to collect this data, if we were to build this model, if we were to build this product, what is the worst thing someone could do, right? And so through these scenarios, sometimes we identify products or data investment areas that we don't want to invest in, because we say, well, we don't want to get to a place where we're actually doing X, Y, or Z. Now, as a company, we create content and we report on issues, and we've probably been some of the most vocal companies around misinformation and fake news. And so BuzzFeed started reporting about this beat before the recent elections in the United States 4 years ago, and effectively coined the term fake news. But we put out all these explainers, and we continuously report on ways in which misinformation and abuse is happening on networks and social networks. Here's an example of a way in which we try to sort of identify different perspectives, content, and really produce them for our viewers. So this is a module that used to live on site. It's called Outside Your Bubble, and it takes an important issue and tries to identify different points of views and highlight them and link to them. We also turned it into a show that ran on Facebook, right? So we take an idea and we try various different formats and ways in which we reach different audiences around this idea. So, good or bad, savior or destroyer? If you take one thing from this talk, by leaving here today, I'd like you to recognize that it's complicated, right? There are many, many advantages to leveraging data and leveraging machine learning and artificial intelligence. And I think for media companies, it's critical to do that as a way to reach larger audiences and really understand who they're engaging with. So it's critical for media companies to do this. But at the same time, we have to recognize some of the unintended consequences, especially when we personalize content in these increasingly polarized digital spaces. So it is all of our duties as we sort of produce these services, as we consume these services, to make sure the companies are acting ethically when they collect data and when they display data. to users and companies around the world. Thank you so much.